once again, we have Raj Sherman with us in the studio. And joining us via Skype is Scott Hennig, National Communication Director of the Alberta Taxpayers Association. The conversation today is about the budget, announced just yesterday, as also Raj Sherman's penchant for being in the news. A lot of buzz about which party he's going to align with in the next few weeks or months. But first, let us begin with Scott Hennig. Mr. Hennig, thanks so much for joining us from Kelowna. We've caught you just as you've landed there, I guess. How's your morning going?
You know, I haven't actually got out of the airport yet, but I think they told us on the plane it's about minus 16, so not a whole lot different, actually, I think, from Edmonton.
Okay, so we had a chat last evening, and, you represent a group dedicated to lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. How much of this do you see reflected in yesterday's budget?
Well, I mean, fortunately, there are no real tax increases. I mean, they haven't raised income taxes. They didn't raise any business taxes. What they did do is make some changes on some tax, fuel tax rebates, which really, for the most part, won't affect the average Joe citizen. The big change they did make, though, was changes to fees. When you register your car, you're paying an extra. I think it's going from 61 to 75. When you register a business, it's going from 100 to 250. I mean, there are those types of things, albeit, though, they haven't raised those since 2002. So had we been getting sort of 2 or 3% increases a year, every year, rather than one big lump sum one, it probably would be about the same as we are today. But it's still, it's going to be a little bit of a surprise for some people when they go to re-register the car this year.
Mr. Hennig, the one thing that some analysts, some economists would really worry about in this budget is, given the financial situation that Alberta is in today, what's happening as far as oil goes, plus also given the fact that we are running deficits, there is no talk about austerity measures. There's no talk about looking at cutting expenditure. Does that worry you?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, the government's got themselves a cushion with the sustainability fund, but we're rapidly draining that thing. I mean, they're going to be down to what they're going to say $5 billion after this fiscal year left in that fund, but in reality, they're also borrowing $3.3 billion for capital against that fund. So in really, that fund will only be worth about $2 billion after this fiscal year. That is only going to get us through 6 to 9 months of the next fiscal year if they continue along this path. I mean, what they've done in this budget is they've once again put off for tomorrow making some tough decisions. I mean, no one likes having to cut budgets. No one likes having to make tough decisions. But ultimately, that's your role as a government. It's your job as a government to make sure that we don't put ourselves into a situation where, like where we were in the 1990s, where we were spending a lot of money, over $1 billion a year, just servicing the interest on our debt because we'd racked it up so much. I mean, and we're moving back towards it. They've doubled the amount of our interest costs on borrowing over the last 2 years. I mean, we're moving slowly back in that direction. And if they don't take care of getting the budget under control in the next 9 months, then the next budget is going to be either very ugly, or they're going to have to start borrowing money for real and put us back into a real debt.
Raj here may like to ask you some questions as well. Raj Sherman, go ahead, Raj. Do you have...
Scott, you make some very good points. Scott, taxes or fees, is there a difference? Is a fee a tax?
Well, I mean, it depends. If I mean, ultimately, it's all coming into your pocket. So most people, that you feel out of your left pocket or out of your right pocket, it really doesn't matter. But if it's a user fee that actually reflects the cost of providing a service, and you have some control over that service, so you can say, well, I'm either not going to go and use that service, so I'm not going to have to pay it. It is a little bit different. I mean, because you can't avoid paying taxes. I mean, you get that taken right off your paycheck. You can't avoid paying some of these fees. Now, obviously, if you want to register a car, if you want to drive, and most people do have cars in this province, very tough to avoid that. But if it does reflect the cost to provide the service of the vehicle registration, then fine. According to finance officials, they told us yesterday that they're still not charging enough to recover the cost of the service. I mean, that's something that I can't verify or confirm. But the bottom line is that they should be making a little, annual adjustments to reflect the cost of the service rather than big, huge jumps. But I mean, it's not something that I'm not going to be lighting my hair on fire about it. That's for sure.
Scott, with oil at $100 a barrel, you have a deficit either because you spend too much or you don't earn enough. Can you comment on the expenditure side? What are we spending too much on, and what should we cut to balance the budget? And two, on the income side, I understand that we make more from gambling and alcohol and cigarette taxes than we do off the resources that we have. Can you comment on whether we should increase our income from cigarettes and sin taxes, or is there income enough?
Well, on the expense side first, Alberta is, we haven't seen all the provincial budgets yet for this next year, but as of 2010-11, the Alberta government was the second highest per capita spender on programs in the entire country, only second to Newfoundland and Labrador. Our revenues, though, come in around average. So it's very difficult to be an average province when it comes to revenue levels and be one of the top dogs when it comes to spending. That doesn't work for your household. It doesn't work for government. So we would say it's a spending problem. On the revenue side, we collect, I think, about $9 billion, $9 billion on personal income tax, another $3 billion on corporate tax. We're collecting about $8 billion on natural resource revenues. Stuff like cigarette taxes, those types of premiums, I think it's around $3 billion. So we're certainly not getting more from cigarette taxes and fuel taxes and those types of smaller taxes than we are from our natural non-renewable resources. On the issue of sin taxes, our supporters seem to be fairly ambivalent when it comes to sin taxes. The only thing you need to worry about when it comes to tobacco taxes, because there is evidence that shows that if you increase tobacco taxes, you cut down on youth smoking. But you also, when you increase it, you can run into the situation they have in Ontario and Quebec, where you see lots of smuggling going on. Actually, it's in the news right now about potential contraband cigarettes in Alberta, but it's huge in Ontario and Quebec, where there are there's a very large percentage of cigarettes that province are contraband coming in either from the States or from various reserves. We don't have that problem yet in Alberta, but if you do run the risk of creating that problem if you do raise your cigarette taxes to that level.
So on the expenditure side, it's healthcare, education, and post-secondary. Which schools do we close while we're building 14 new schools, and which university buildings do we shut down? And we're building a whole bunch of new hospital infrastructure. Which hospitals do we close, and how many staff do we lay off? And Dr. Paul Park said we have people dying in the waiting rooms already and suffering on cancer wait lists, and children are suffering and waiting to get their surgeries done. People are waiting to get their hips and knees and cataracts done. What do you say to those people?
Well, on the school issue, we basically have the same basic number of students that we had 10 years ago in this province. The number of K-12 students hasn't really changed. It actually dipped for a while, and it's back up to the level we had about 10 years ago, yet we have a whole pile of new schools that we're building. The issue isn't that we don't have enough schools, it's that the schools are not in the right location. The bottom line decisions and close down schools that aren't being used, or allow them to turn into charter schools where if there's only a few students that are actually going to some of these schools that are underutilized, that the parents can decide to take it over and run it as their own school. But we can't continue to have more and more schools with the same number of students. That just doesn't work. Same when it comes to the same issue or a similar issue when it comes to hospitals. We need to make sure that when we do build new hospital wings, that we actually have people to staff them. It's really not that useful to put a bunch of beds in and build a new wing on a hospital if you've got nothing in it. And we're not really getting that good a deal on infrastructure right now. So you may be able to make the argument that, we're getting such a good deal on infrastructure, let's just build the hospitals now while we can. Honestly, we're not getting that good of a deal on infrastructure yet. We saw the price of infrastructure go basically double between 2004 and 2008. It has come down slightly since then. So we are getting a better deal compared to 2008 or 2009, but we're getting a terrible deal still compared to 2004, 2005 levels because they rocketed out of control. So we believe the government is driving some of those costs up with their record spending on infrastructure, and they also are building in by virtue of building these things automatic cost pressures on having to staff and heat and light and insure all these things. So it's about smarter planning. It's about stretching out your infrastructure budget. It's also about cutting out things, not necessarily firing doctors and teachers and nurses, but doing things like getting rid of our carbon capture and sequestration, $2 billion spending there. We have $100 million in a venture capital fund that we're investing. I mean, there are lots of places. We put 25 different recommendations together on places that we thought the government could cut spending, and none of them called for firing doctors or nurses or teachers.
I'd like to draw back your attention to education. You've raised a very valid point. In fact, I was looking through the budget and I was looking at past figures, and it's 63% increase over the last decade as far as government spending, kindergarten to 12, K-12 to 12 education goes. But as you said, the number of students that have actually entered the education system is minimal, hardly any. Is this a matter of concern that we are still pandering to, if I may use that word, to hikes in, those who are teaching? We have a huge amount of money going into increase of salaries, for instance. So the system is absorbing, a lot of money is going into sustaining salaries, hike in salaries, rather than infrastructure, rather than modernizing our education system, computerizing. There are so many issues that the education system is faced with. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, if you look at the average school board budget, somewhere between 75 and 80% of every dollar that each school board spends is on salaries. So that is the major cost driver. So when salaries are going up, that means you're taking more money out of your other places that you would spend in education, so buying computers, buying textbooks, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely a big cost. And in Alberta, we do have the highest paid teachers in the country. I mean, and that's what has been the result of us putting more and more money in to the system. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we decide that we want to have smaller class sizes, or we decide we want to have more computers, or we decide we want to do more modernization of some of these schools. And actually, there's, just as a side on that, I met with some guys a couple of years ago that had a ream of research on what would happen if they, to the actual learning systems that have been done, if you modernize some of the actual classrooms. Making acoustics apparently is one of the driving factors of kids being able to hear the teacher and learn in a classroom. It's not so much a class size. So doing those sorts of things into a classroom, those are decisions that if we decide we want to do them, then we're going to have to put a hold on raising teacher salaries. And in fact, we've called for a rollback of 5% on every government employee's salary to help balance this budget. I mean, that's something that was done back in the 1990s, and it ensures that no one loses their job, and it also would also ensure that they're going to continue to still have very good, high-paying jobs and secure jobs while we start to trim back and balance this budget.
Exactly. The austerity has to come in somewhere. There's a 5 or 6% unemployment rate. There are people there who are not even getting any salaries at all. So is this pandering to, it seems more like a political, they're preparing for, it's a political budget rather than a real hardcore budget, a budget that was needed at this point in time, considering the deficits. There were certain hard decisions that needed to be taken. Do you see those anywhere at all? Do you see those austerity measures anywhere at all in the budget?
Well, I mean, there's certainly some departments that are taking a hit. I mean, if you look at the Ministry of, I think it's Housing and Urban, whatever the name is now, I can't keep track of them, but the Ministry of Housing took a very large cut out of their budget. There are some, I think 12, I think if I counted last night, I think there was 12 ministries that saw decreases. There was 12 ministries that saw increases. But Raj is right. I mean, you see the increases in healthcare, education. You see the cuts on all the other ones for the most part. I mean, housing and seniors and those sorts of things. You tend to see the cuts on. I mean, the government, to their credit, limited the program growth in spending, growth in program spending to 0.5%. That's something they should have done about 4 years ago. I mean, had they done that when we started warning back in 2007 that within 3 to 5 years this government was going to be running budget deficits, even before there was any talk of there being any world recession or a drop in oil price, we could see that just by looking at their spending projections, they were going to be running a deficit. So when we said to them years ago, you need to freeze spending, or you need to limit your spending severely, and they ignored that and raised spending by double digits again. This is what happens, and this is what should have. This is the budget we should have seen 4 years ago, rather than this year. I mean, and the longer you delay the tough decisions, the tougher they get. I mean, they basically said for next year we're going to go from a $3.4 billion deficit to a $600 million deficit. Well, good luck. I mean, you're talking about cutting $2.8 billion in next year's budget. That's not likely to happen under what they continue to do here. I mean, this is the same thing Don Getty did. It's putting off tough decisions for tomorrow, and they keep getting tougher and tougher and tougher.
Joe from the chat room, we have a question for you. Joe from the chat room asks, what will it take to get more royalties from oil companies? We are not getting enough. Is that fair enough?
Boy, that's a tough one. I mean, they had a system. They decided to change it, and I think there was a lot of support at the time to raise royalties. It didn't necessarily work out the way that I think a lot of people were hoping. They reversed a lot of that, and we start to see more development happening. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the world that impact Alberta when it comes to our oil and gas system. The shale gas down in the States and in eastern Canada is going to be driving down exploration and also prices for natural gas in Alberta. It's going to make things very difficult. This isn't 2001 anymore where we're seeing $10 gas. We're not going to see $10 gas in the near future. This is a product that the government owns. And, if you want people to come and take it out of your ground and provide you with that royalty, I mean, it's worth nothing to us under the ground if they don't pull it out and sell it. We don't get any cash for that. You have to create a fair system that people are going to want to come in and invest in and put the work into getting it out. So, I mean, I don't know. You compare it to other jurisdictions, but they're not really fair comparisons, especially when it comes to say oil and oil with Alaska and Norway. They can pump one hole in the ground and get out 100 times more than we can out of ours. So it's a different system. Some of those comparisons are not fair, and I mean, I don't know what the answer is for the perfect system, but one that is certainly one that is competitive and one that stays the same and isn't constantly changing for these explorers is not a bad one, and it's worked out so far so good for this province as we've seen very, very large rewards from it.
What worries me is the fact that, most of the budget, you've raised a very valid point about shale gas and how the U.S. could just pump up production there. And that's going to really impact our budget, because in terms of budgeting and all the revenues that are being looked at, it's from oil and gas, basically. And that is very worrisome. And with that, I throw it to Raj. Raj, you had a point there?
See, I'd just like to pick up on the austerity measures. I don't like to use the word austerity. It's a scary word. What I like to, Scott brings up a lot of very important points. I'd like to talk about prudent fiscal management. We need to have regular program reviews, at least once every term, zero baseline budgeting. Sometimes we have programs that worked 10 years ago. To continue on with those programs, you're actually starving the programs that do work. There are no true performance and accountability measures for the money that we're spending. The number one expenditure item is actually healthcare. And everything else on the expenditure side depends on healthcare. This is why I asked to legislate the strongest performance measures in the nation on healthcare. That way the investments will be made in the right spots, not because of political decisions. We have deferred maintenance of existing infrastructure. The most expensive infrastructure in Alberta is healthcare infrastructure. We can't maintain the infrastructure we currently have. We have tons of medical infrastructure that was built that we can't afford to staff because we haven't built the operational funding into the new infrastructure, and then we're building more infrastructure. Where are the staff going to come from? And this is why we're nickel and diming our seniors, we're nickel and diming our kids in schools, we're nickel and diming the high school, university students. We may not have raised tuition, but we tripled their fees. Personally, many of the Albertans, from the school kids to the university kids and seniors, they're getting screwed. We shouldn't have this problem in the wealthiest state on the planet. We need prudent fiscal management, good performance and accountability measures. Now, when it comes to unions, the union that I'm really concerned about is the union of 67 elected representatives who gave themselves, when cabinet and the premier's office, they give themselves a 34% pay raise. What example have we set for the people of Alberta? When we expand ministries to 24 ministries, half of the Make Work projects, and then the ministries don't talk. This is the problem in government. We've fragmented the ministries. The Ministry of Health and Wellness should actually be the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and maybe housing, because housing of the vulnerable and housing of those in Alberta Hospital and housing of our seniors, if we don't house them, they actually end up in acute care. So why are we building more hospitals when the current ones we have are turning into long-term care facilities?
In fact, Evan, if we could have those graphs, please. 40% of our budget is going to the healthcare system when the basic inefficiencies within the system are not being attacked. That is very scary. We have most of our income is coming, and if you see there, Raj, look there, Raj, personal income tax is accounting for most of the revenue that the government is earning, which means there is no direction as far as increasing corporate revenue goes, which means that we are not doing well as far as attracting other industry goes. That's scary. If you look at that chart there, that little chunk, black, huge chunk, is what the personal income tax is. And no wonder they've raised all these little fees like registering your car, so you got to pay more. No wonder, because this is the kind of money that goes unnoticed, but it is contributing. It's a taxpayer's money that is contributing to that income, that personal income tax revenue that the government is earning. And now they've increased it. And so this means that we as taxpayers are paying for the inefficiencies of the government. Why should I or you as a taxpayer be paying that kind of money if it is not being efficiently managed? The valid point that you raised, Raj, was about auditing where is that money going? It's about auditing what is happening to the taxpayers' dollars, and this is exactly what I see happening,
Sunny, I think
the wastage.
The governments need to, for the money that we spend, we must demand better performance. Better performance on the healthcare side. Healthcare is number one. I've been called a one-trick pony. I'll tell you, it's a pretty damn big trick. It's going to take 70% of all provincial spending across the nation. Because of healthcare, this is why you're being nickeled and dimed on the income side. This is why you're being taxed. Okay, Albertans are getting screwed. They're paying for it, and they deserve better service. And on the other side, that's why our seniors are being nickeled and dimed. And these austerity measures, I believe we can deliver better service to Albertans within the same envelope if we demand a performance. But that's not going to start until
but that's the task of people like you who represent the political system. I mean, you cannot absolve yourself from all that's happening around you, Raj, because you were part of a system earlier, and I know that you did leave that system, but within the system there are not enough people who are fighting it out.
You're absolutely correct, Sanita. Look, their plan was to privatize healthcare. I was demanding an audit of AHS. I said, we must demand an audit. If Capital Health Region was balanced with no deficit, Calgary had $188 million deficit, Dr. Duckett walked into a $1.3 billion deficit. Where did that come from? Did it suddenly appear? Is there money sitting on shelves? I said, look, we need to audit AHS. I bet you there's money, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars sitting on shelves. When you have an organizational structure and chart, 240 pages, that's ridiculous. I believe we can deliver better healthcare in the same envelope of funding, maybe even in a lesser envelope of funding, if we make the appropriate investments.
Okay, it's not just about healthcare, Raj. As I see it, I'm a bit disappointed. This was a platform that the Conservatives could have launched their political agenda on. They could have shown that they're real, real Conservatives. I don't see that. I don't see them, they're not doing their job in terms of telling people what is actually awaiting them in the next 4 or 5 years. As we pointed out, and I was talking to Scott as well on this, times are volatile. The Middle East is in tailspin, and even if our oil production increases, or even if where will we supply it to? The U.S. is doing bad. I mean, in terms of its economy. So there's so much that we can supply it there. We cannot suddenly develop. There's this whole talk about how we are developing India and China as markets. Excuse me, we need the infrastructure to go there. Do you agree? I know I mean, you can't have pipelines overnight. We're just deceiving Albertans when we're telling them we have India and China. So what if the US is not doing well? The point is, how are you going to supply that oil?
Well, see, the biggest thing is, Scott made a couple of very important points. What we need to look at is outcome and evidence-based decisions. We can't make decisions because some guy gave me $100,000 for my campaign. We need to make the right decisions. Let's make efficient decisions. Scott brought up very good points about schools. Let's use them efficiently. Let's get our children better education with less money. So if we're building 14 new schools, we're building all this infrastructure. It's not about healthcare. You're absolutely correct. But everything else depends on healthcare on this expenditure side. There's certain investments that actually reduce healthcare costs. There are some good decisions here. Affordable housing, let's get people off the streets. Because the evidence is it costs society $136,000 a year to house somebody who's homeless in emergency departments and in prisons, in the back of an ambulance, versus actually getting them affordable housing. Here's something that's a very good decision. I think the municipal funding is a very good decision.
What's so good about the municipal funding?
Well, how many cars in Edmonton got wrecked because there were potholes all over the place? I think it's good let the local decisions be made by the local leaders, the municipalities. They are best to judge what infrastructure they need in their local area.
I think we are getting screwed on this one. I'll tell you why. Because we are paying to the municipal government our taxes, separate taxes. If a company starts today, they have to pay municipal taxes. So, and on top of that, the municipalities are getting funding from the provincial government. So that means that's a double whammy. They're getting, it's getting more and more complicated. This extra funding, taxing. So the municipal government gets it raises taxes, plus it gets funding from the province.
Sunita,
and there's going to be this whole tripling, this trickle-down impact.
Sunita, and this is why it's incumbent when you give money. If I give my kids money, I want to know what they bought with it and how they made that decision. You need good performance and accountability measures. Our job as elected officials is to get you the best value for your taxpayer dollar, get you as many services as possible. In fact, services that you need, not as many as possible, but services that you actually need. Services that you want, what do you want and what do you need? There's a difference. What you really need when you're suffering and you're sick, you need to get looked after. This is a Canadian and Albertan value. If your children need an education, you shouldn't be denied a good education. In a global marketplace, it's not survival of the fittest. It's actually going to be survival of the smartest and wisest. We are competing in a global economy. All the manufacturing in the U.S. has gone to China. All the brain jobs have all gone to India. And our best trading partner is in huge trouble. They're printing up monopoly money like there's no tomorrow. In a free market country, the taxpayers had to bail out all the biggest corporations. And one thing that's really hurt them badly is, one, they have an unhealthy workforce. You add to that $10,000 a year for for-profit private insurance, the cost of every laborer. And this is why American car companies cannot compete against those across the pond. And our trade is 80% with them. We're in really big trouble if we don't get our act together right now.
Let me ask Evan if Scott is still there. Is he still there, Evan?
Absolutely, yeah.
Scott, do you have anything to add to this conversation? I'm sure you have lots to say in terms of what are the recommendations that you had made. You were talking some time back, you told me about some recommendations you had made.
Yeah, no, Raj actually hit on a couple of them. One, performance reviews and zero-based budgeting are very important. They're so important because you're right, Raj. I mean, they set up these programs, and then the program may have run its course, and whether it's needed anymore or not, it doesn't matter, because it's empire building. I mean, you get rewarded if you're a manager or if you're a deputy minister or an ADM by taking on bigger and bigger and bigger roles in ministries. So, your goal is to take on more staff, to have bigger programs, bigger everything. We're rewarding people the wrong way. I mean, it should be the guy that has the smallest, most efficient ministry that's getting rewarded the best, not the one that oversees the biggest bloated one. And I mean, so we've created a situation where the incentives are to build and build and build and grow and hire more people and maintain the programs, rather than saying, that program really isn't running its same purpose anymore. It's run its course. let's get rid of it. And zero-based budgeting would do that. You basically start and say, okay, we don't have any existing program or budget. If we were to start today and we want to deliver a certain service or program or have a certain outcome, what is the best way to go about it? Not just look at the way we were doing it and saying, well, let's just do that.
I think we're having some technical problems with Scott there. But there is a question from the chat room that I'd like to pull up. Is the anti-oil sands view around the world affecting our royalties in the future, which will not rebuild our provincial savings?
So
Scott, are you there? Can you hear us?
Because, I mean, it's their jobs on the line if they discover this.
I think we've run into, oh, there you are. Did you hear my question, Scott, about the environment? There's so much.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so let me repeat it for you. There's a question, it comes from the chat room. There's so much of anti-environmental, campaigns going around. For instance, oil sands is being targeted because it's, as people would like to call it, it's the tar sands and dirty oil. Now, will that affect our royalties in the future? And will this, in turn, impact the rebuilding of provincial savings? What's your view on that? This whole thing about...
They could. They could. I mean...
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm breaking up here now, but yeah, they could. I mean, these things could have an impact if there was their supply of oil. But I mean, I think called ethical oil, and it talks about all of the the difference between our Alberta oil sands versus some of these other ones, some of the other sources of oil in other countries. And really, I mean, if we're talking about the way that we treat our workers, the way that we treat our citizens, we have very ethical oil when it comes to comparisons to Middle Eastern countries that don't have the same labor standard, the same treatment of their citizens. So, I mean, I think that some of these environmental groups also need to look at a bigger picture, but ultimately, until the replacement for people are going to buy it. I mean, and yeah, sure, the U.S. may go into recession, cut back a little bit on that, but ultimately they're not all going to be able to afford electric cars if they don't have jobs. So they're going to have to continue to buy our oil, whether they like it or not, or whether anyone likes it or not. So I'm not overly concerned about these groups hitting us that hard, but it is something the government needs to keep their eye on and something they need to push back on.
Thank you so much, Scott. I think we need to thank you so much because you've spent time at the airport and I guess you have other things to do. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Take care, Scott.
You too. Thank you.
Sunita, one thing I'd like to talk about is untendered contracts. In the West Edmonton area, we had Bill 50, building God knows how many $1 billion of power lines. Why are these contracts not tendered? They're just given to big companies, which are privately owned. Right. Albertans, for the rest of their lives, are going to pay the fees, they're going to pay for the infrastructure, the upkeep, and they won't belong to Albertans. They're going to belong to private interests. Why are these contracts not tendered? Our job as elected officials is really to get Albertans the best possible deal for their buck. And this is one of the reasons that we have this deficit. We're building this record infrastructure. Now, oil just hit $100 a barrel. It might hit 120 tomorrow, depending on what happens politically across the world. The governments have to stop getting in the way of the free market. When business and enterprise needs the labor workforce, stop competing with them and raising their costs, and stop building mega projects while free enterprise is building them. Right. And when things go down, build them at that time. Right now, if oil goes to 120, 140 again because of instability, we're back to where we were again. Remember, we had medical infrastructure that was supposed to cost $500 million, $550 million, the South Calgary Hospital. The costs ballooned to $2.4 billion. The hospital still isn't open. It's been downgraded to 1.3 or 1.4 billion, and it's half the hospital it was originally designed to be. I think it's a good thing that they built it, but it should have cost $550 million. And it should have been a full-size hospital.
See, it's not just health, Raj. In fact, I was reading in the budget, there is an increase in immigration, employment and immigration. Budgeted program expenses 1.5 billion in 2011-12, 61 million or 5.2% reduction from the 2010-11 forecast. But it includes income supports, 617 million for income supports and related health benefits, a net 29.6 million reduction from 2010-11 forecast. Funding for new or, what's amazing here is nobody is looking at the programs themselves. There are, I've been doing a lot of work on immigrants, and the first thing that comes to mind is that who is auditing these programs? Are they even reaching the people concerned? Are they still relevant? For instance, language programs and things like that, money that's being spent. Who is looking at what has, what needs to be retailored to meet the present-day immigrant who's so well-educated, who's multifaceted in terms of not just the languages that they can speak, but in terms of having international exposure. So where is, who, as you rightly put it, we need to reevaluate these schemes that have been running for ages.
And you're absolutely correct. This is why it's so important we actually have regular program reviews with strong performance and accountability measures, and we need to have regular audits of all those programs. Because if you don't, these programs go unchecked, we become dependent upon them, and good luck trying to cut them afterwards.
Exactly.
And we can actually redeploy our labor workforce. It's not about firing people and laying people off. It's about having our labor workforce where we need them. And I believe there's a lot of wastage in the system. Whoever inherits the government next, God bless them, because they're going to have to clean up a mess.
No, it's also a question of lesser government. On the federal level, we've had a 12% increase in bureaucracy. I don't know about the provincial level. I'm sure it must be reflecting some bit of it as well. But this huge, especially in the time of IT, information technology, where some of the departments are getting obsolete, including, if I may put it very harshly and bluntly, Service Canada, for instance. There's certain services that just need a click of a button. So it's the government, it's the whole structure of the government that needs rethinking.
And you're absolutely correct. That's where the problem starts. It all starts at the top with leadership. It's governance. It's governance. When you have make-work projects we had 72 MLAs, they lost 5, we're down to 67. You have these make-work projects. When you expand ministries to 24 ministries, what you do is you fragment decision-making.
Right.
When this ministry, whose budget is big, they actually depend on this ministry whose budget is small. If they're not talking, and in the healthcare, if the bureaucracy shop is not talking to the healthcare delivery shop, but their policy and delivery depends on seniors, it's all interconnected. You're right. It's not all about healthcare. It's siloed, and it begins with leadership. We don't need 24 ministries.
Exactly.
We need to contract down to, 14 ministries, maybe 16. We need to contract the ministries, and you have make-work projects for all the MLAs on all these committees when all the vote is whipped anyways. What's the point of having these committees just to give MLAs a higher pay raise? This is called public service. This is not called getting rich off the public. If this is the best job many elected officials have had, well, maybe they shouldn't be here for so darn long. This is why I said Albertans are getting screwed, and it starts at the top. This is really about governance. Governance and values. We need a government that's honest, true integrity. We need a government that's transparent.
Do you think this resignation of Mr. Morton, who was supposed to deliver the budget, is a bit of a pre-planned thing? He's a hardcore conservative, or he's projected to be one. But if this is the kind of thing that we get from Mr. Ted Morton and, Mr. Doug Griffiths, who was his parliamentary assistant, both of them are running for, it's very convenient. Now they can project them as hardcore conservatives who'll slash cuttings, slash expenditure. But actually the budget somewhere, he must have contributed somewhere to the making of this budget.
Well, Mr. Morton is everyone that's on cabinet. First of all, everyone running for leadership now,
right.
They can't offer a new vision because they've actually been there. This is their vision. They're at cabinet. Caucus probably should take some blame for it as well. But really, the decisions were so top down. Those in caucus, many don't really have a choice. And if you speak up, well, you know what's going to happen to you. Exactly what happened to me. Mr. Morton and I, we share these values of fiscal responsibility, fiscal efficiency. I actually see eye to eye with Ted. I'm not a cut and slash and burn type guy. I believe in prudent decision making. You can't just do blanket cuts. You have certain investments. Sometimes you invest $1 here, you save $5 over there. But Mr. Morton, he's got a big challenge. He was crying when he delivered the last budget. I don't think he wanted to cry this year. I don't know how, if he becomes a leader and he becomes a premier, he's got a big mess. He's going to clean up all this infrastructure that's going to get built.
So
with no operational funding.
So what's the political equation playing out here? Doug Griffiths, his assistant, and Ted Morton. You see, is this some kind of this will work out well for Mr. Morton, won't it?
Well, you know what? You need two horses to run.
Because if you have Doug Horner and Alison Redford, and you have four people contending, and this could actually be chipping away at...
It's going to be a very interesting race, and I think it could be very divisive because you have two very different camps. Ideally, I think Doug's probably going to go to Ted, and Allison will go to Doug Horner, or Horner will go to Allison, whoever's at the top. But at the end of the day, we have to stop this yo-yo decision-making, okay? It's crazy, and it's yo-yo. We need to make prudent decisions, good decisions, based on facts and evidence. Let's take the ideology out of it. I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm as cheap as they come. And that's how my parents raised me. But however, there's sometimes you make an investment. I want my children to get an education, because if they get an education, they probably won't get sick. They probably will have a higher paying job, and they'll pay taxes. They'll contribute to the community. Right. I want my parents to get looked after. Because if my dad doesn't get good health care, my mother becomes a widow, then all of a sudden she's lonely and depressed. You want to keep our parents and grandparents together. They're the people that built this country, and you want to provide for them when they're sick without being a crazy left-wing socialist, right? This isn't about socialism. It's about making right choices, good choices, right choices for the people of Alberta.
So what's your story now, going ahead?
Well,
are you still hanging footloose, or is it some party that you're aligning yourself to?
Well, as you know, for me personally, my family had asked me in September to just resign and go back to doctoring and look after my children. They're saying, look, these people don't listen. They don't care. You've been there for 3 years. Go back to doctorate and resign your seat, or quit. Don't run next election. And I was seriously considering that when things got really nasty and messy. And that wasn't from my point of view. It was from their side. However, to be honest, healthcare is in a tank like it's never been before. We're spending more than ever before. And every other ministry, every other income support for education, for our seniors, the things that actually keep you healthy are at risk. I can't leave. I'm an independent member. It's like starting all over again, back to square one. When I had to decide who am I going to run for, whose values do my values coincide with? Sometimes the leader defines the values or adjusts the values of the party they're with, and sometimes the party adjusts the values of the leader. I was led to believe that we were going to fix the health system. I was led to believe that the third way is DOA. I was led to believe that we weren't going to do for-profit private health care. This is the document that was presented by Mr. Hornet Caucus that I released publicly. It's about private insurance and doctors opting out. It's the third way. It's alive and well. I can't support it. And that's when all this whisper campaign started. So it's hard for me to go back to the PCs unless, my family won't let me go back unless there's a public apology from the PC party.
Okay, and some people are saying that you've started to get negative publicity for the first time. I was reading some analysis about your position at the moment, and there is talk that you've started getting negative publicity out there.
Sarita, we're in politics. This is politics. You're not going to make everybody happy all the time. I know I've read the blogs. I've been called an opportunist, and I'm thinking, my gosh, my children and my family would beg to differ. My brothers look at my paychecks that I'm not getting. My children look at the father that they don't see anymore, the cranky father, and my parents look at the son they never see. Public service is a tremendous amount of work. Running again is a very serious decision, and I've made the decision to run again. I really have two decisions to make. One, is which party I'm going to run for. And next, I had made comments to put them into context. If I end up running for a party that doesn't have a leader, there's a good chance I may seek leadership. But even that's a very big decision, tremendous responsibility.
So are you thinking in terms of some particular...
Well, right now, I will be making an announcement in March. That's what I will commit to.
So there are two parties that have no leaders at the moment.
I will be making, there are three parties that don't have a leader. I will be making a decision in March.
So you are considering the Conservatives then?
I come from the emergency departments where we make life and death decisions every day. I make decisions. I made a decision to speak up, and I knew the risks that I would get thrown out. It's not possible for me to return to the Conservatives unless they change their ways. The values are all wrong right now. Their values need to be redefined. It's not possible for me to go back, and my family won't let me go back unless there's a public apology, like I said. But I need to meet with my constituents. My constituents, not one constituent in 3 town hall forums said, go back to the PCs. I can't go back if my people don't want me to go back. But really, you have to ask myself, why did I run in the first place? I ran because this province has been very good to me and my family. It was an opportunity to give back. Every public servant out there works very hard, and bar none, regardless of what party they're in, it's a ton of work. There's not a lot of opportunity. Premier Stelmach will tell you how much work it is for a leader, and cabinet ministers will tell you how they're rarely home. However, at this point in time, I believe I have something to contribute. I don't have all the answers to everything. And until I feel I've contributed, or the people of Edmonton Meadowlark are fed up with me, I'm going to stay here until certain things are fixed.
So we wish you all the luck, and I'm sure we'll see you more often on our program here. And hope the government takes the right tough decisions as well. It was a bit of a disappointment as, one wanted to see more in terms of guidelines, how even major issues like energy, for instance, there is no footprint even as far as energy goes there. There's nothing about solar energy, wind energy, all the renewable, renewable energy. There's no platform to launch. They could have tax incentives. They could have so much going for clean energy industry, but one doesn't see it there. One just hopes that some tough decisions will be taken by the next government, and hope that it will happen as soon as possible. And on that note, I think we should end it here. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.